Hello and welcome to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Today we've got a few things to discuss, including a signing out on the Western Conference, some injury updates as there have been a few players who have been placed on injury reserve over the weekend, and a couple of trade rumors involving Vancouver, Arizona, and will any trades happen before the Christmas roster freeze? We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. I'll kick things off today by discussing a signing that has happened with the Vegas Golden Knights, as the Golden Knights have signed 4th round pick in 2021 Jacob Brabenec to a 3-year entry-level contract that has an average annual value of $847,000. Now, the guy is playing over in the QMJHL right now, and he's done okay. He had a really good season last year, putting up 64 points in 58 games, and really did a great job in the QMJHL. This year he hasn't been doing the best, putting up only 25 points in 28 games, so he's not on pace to beat last year's point total, but he's still done a really good job in the QMJHL, and I think he could have an NHL future. I think it's probably going to take a little bit of time. He's probably got another year in the QMJHL, and then probably another year in the AHL before he contends for a roster spot, but I do think he could, in time, be a good third, fourth line center for the Vegas Golden Knights. I think he could be a really good bottom six forward for Vegas. In time, I do think it's still going to be a couple years down the road, but in time, I do think he could easily be a very good player for the Vegas Golden Knights. I think, given the fact he was taking the 4th round, I think Vegas got a bit of a steal here. I think he could easily be their 4th line center or 3rd line center in 3 to 4 years' time. And I think in 2 to 3 years' time, he could easily contend for a roster spot. So, great job by the Vegas Golden Knights to sign former 4th rounder Brabenec. And while I don't think he has a future in the NHL right now, he's probably going to get a year in the QMJHL, year in the AHL, I do think in time he could be a good bottom six center for the Vegas Golden Knights. So, it's the only signing we have for today. Now let's go over to the injury updates part of the video. We'll start with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, the Jets had some good news late last week as they were able to activate defenseman Logan Stanley off of injury reserve. Stanley had been missing time due to an ankle injury, probably for 2-3 weeks, maybe closer to a month. But getting him back was big. I know that the Jets still have a lot of injuries in the forward group, like Ehlers and Appleton. So getting a little bit more healthy on the blue line is not bad at all. And they have a really deep blue line too. So getting Stanley back into a game action was huge. But he only was able to play one game, and he's now back on injury reserve. So he's going to miss time due to a lower body injury. He was placed in injury reserve earlier this week, and he's now going to miss about 4 weeks due to a lower body injury. So he's going to be out for about a month, and that's awful news for Stanley. He was a really good third pair defenseman over the first few weeks of the season. Now he's going to miss around 2 months straight. I mean, he did have a game or two in there in between, but he's probably going to miss around 2 months. Now, that's awful for Stanley. Stanley's a good third-pair defenseman, really big physical player, and I think he's a really good player on that third pair. I think if a guy like a DeMello or a Dillon were to be moved, he could easily slide into a top-4 role. But definitely a really big blow to the Jets' defensive core. And I hope Stanley can get back soon. I know he's probably going to be out for a month. But hopefully Stanley can come back and stay healthy next time he gets back, because Stanley's he just can't stay healthy. I know the Jets have a really deep blue line. Guys like Heinel and Sandberg are probably going to get more opportunity with a guy like Stanley out. But still, having Stanley out again is not ideal situation. And hopefully he can get back and continue to be a good third-pair defenseman for the Winnipeg Jets. But the more important one was that bottom six forward Saku Menelainen, who has been actually a really good bottom six forward. He has not been able to get in the top six role, even with guys like Ehlers and Appleton out long term, but he has been a really good third line forward and had some really good bottom six forward production for the Winnipeg Jets. But he is going to miss the next 4 weeks and close to a month due to a upper body injury, and that is another big blow to the Winnipeg Jets forward group. They already have Appleton out and Ehlers out, and those two are big pieces of their top 9. Losing Menelainen, who is really running himself to be a good top 9 forward, is another huge blow to the forward group. They have not too much depth, but they do have some good depth, so they're really going to have to call upon those depth players right now, as Appleton's probably not going to be back for another month or two, and Ehlers is probably not going to be out for probably another few weeks at the very least. So Ehlers, Appleton, Menelainen, 3 good top 9 forwards for this team, all out due to injuries now. So hopefully Menelainen can get back. Hopefully he's back probably earlier than expected, as this Jets team really does have a lot of banged up forwards and could use a guy like Manalainen in the bottom six. So that's all for the Jets. As for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they had both good and bad news on the injury front. To start out with, late last week, they were able to activate TJ Brodie off injury reserve. That is huge. The Maple Leafs had Jake Muzzin, Morgan Riley, TJ Brodie, and Jordy Ben out, and those four were four of their top 8 defensemen. So that was awful news for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But with getting Brodie back, it's a really big, important piece for them. They had been running with players like Giordano, Hole, Sandin, and Liljegren in their top 4. Sandin and Liljegren, I think, do have a future in the top 4. I'm just not sure if they're top 4 ready right now. And then Giordano and Hole are more third pair defensemen. So the fact that they've actually been doing quite well defensively without key guys like Muzzin, Riley, and Brodie is absolutely stunning. And I think that the addition of Brodie getting back into the lineup is going to be a huge boost for the Toronto Maple Leafs and a really good improvement on that blue line. But they also had some bad news on the injury front. Both Victor Mete and Nicholas Robertson out due to injuries. Now, for Mete, it's a lower body injury that he's dealing with, and he's only day-to-day, and he had missed a few games earlier, so being placed in IR is not too substantial. He's probably the 8th or 9th defenseman on the Maple Leafs depth chart, so it's not overly worrisome that they lose a guy like Mete. I know he was a good defensive body and really helped when those other guys were out due to injury, so losing Mete isn't ideal for the Maple Leafs, but it's not a really substantial loss, and I don't think he should be out too long. Probably a week and a half, sometime around the Christmas break he should be back, so not too bad for Mete. As for the other player who the Maple Leafs placed in injury reserve, in Nick Robertson, that one's a much more substantial injury. Now, Robertson went down over the weekend due to an injury. He's now going to miss the next 6 weeks due to a shoulder injury. Now, Robertson missed a huge chunk of last year due to an injury, so getting another injury for the young kid is not ideal. I know he hasn't really been getting into the lineup this year, and he never really got into the lineup last year, but if he was healthy last year, maybe he would have. And he had been starting to get some games in this year with the Maple Leafs top 9. So losing Robertson, not an ideal situation. They don't have too many forwards out right now due to injuries, so losing Robertson is not the worst possible thing for them. It's not like they're battling a lot of injuries on the forward group. And they do have a couple of other guys who could probably step in. Robertson had been a healthy scratch in some games. But still, losing a good young player who was starting to round himself out as a good, at least bottom 6 forward at this point in his career, and was really looking like a good third-line winger, that's a huge blow to the Maple Leafs organization. And hopefully he can come back. He's probably not going to be back until late January, early February. So not an ideal situation at all for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and hopefully Robertson can get back and healthy in the very near future. Over in Vegas, they've had some awful injury news. We'll start in the forward group. Jack Eichel, who is their top-line center, has been placed in injury reserve and is going to miss the next few games due to an injury. Now, Eichel did miss a few games last week due to an injury. He was only an unhealthy scratch, got back into game action over the weekend, and is now on injury reserve. So I don't think he's going to miss too much time. He's definitely going to miss some time. Probably going to be out until after the Christmas break, but he's only day-to-day right now with lower body injuries, so I don't think it's too bad, at least at this point right now, for Eichel. And hopefully Eichel can get back soon, because they do have really good depth in Vegas, but losing a top-line center is never a good thing for a team. So hopefully Eichel can get back. But the more substantial injury news was on the blue line, as we already knew that Alex Pietrangelo was out and not with the Vegas Golden Knights right now due to personal reasons. And they've now lost 2 really good defensemen, starting with Chase Theodore. He hasn't been placed in injury reserve now, but he's going to be out week to week with an injury, and he's going to miss a pretty substantial amount of the next few weeks due to this injury. Now, Pietrangelo is their best defenseman. Theodore is their second best defenseman. So really, really bad for the Vegas Golden Knights. 2 key top 4 pieces of this team not with them right now. So losing Theodore is going to be awful. Week to week is really going to be hard to decipher when he's actually going to be able to come back. I'll probably say somewhere late December, early January will be my guess. Maybe just after the new year. But losing Theodore for any amount of time is awful, given the fact he's one of their better defensemen. And the other injury was a little bit more long-term, as Zach Whitecloud has been placed on long-term injury reserve and was out month to month with an undisclosed injury. Now, Whitecloud has been more of a third-pair defenseman, playing a majority of his time on the third pair with Haig, And while he's not the most offensive defenseman, he can put up points, and he's been a good, solid defender for the Vegas Golden Knights. But with guys like Theodore Pietrangelo, he probably would have been bumped to a top 4 role, and now he's going to be out with an injury. So the Knights are really, really banged up right now. They have a lot of injuries on that blue line. I probably think Whitecloud's month to month means he'll probably miss until, at the very least, late January. So Whitecloud's probably going to be out until late January, early February at the earliest. So a huge blow to Golden Knights blue line. Now the only thing is they do get a little bit of cap relief, putting him on long-term injury reserve. But if he's not out for the entire season, they can't go out and get help. So really a tough position for Vegas, and they're going to have to try and rely on some of their defensive depth with guys like Korzak and Bischoff in the minors. They're going to have to try and make do with 3 important key contributors on that blue line out for the foreseeable future. Over in the Washington Capitals organization, they've had some good and bad news on injury front too. We know that they are a really banged up team. The Washington Capitals have recently been able to activate Dmitry Orlov off injury reserve, and he has been back into game action. Now, Orlov has missed 2-3 weeks, maybe closer to a month, due to an injury. So he has been missing a lot of time. I know the Caps have had a really bad injuries on the blue line. I know Orlov, like we said, has been missing a lot of time recently. Carlson missed a good stretch of a week or two a little while ago. Ferravaris missed last week due to an injury. I'm pretty sure he's still out. So the Caps have definitely had their fair share of adversity on the blue line, but they've done well. The defense has done okay and kept them in games. So hopefully Orlov can come back in and be a good top 4 defenseman like the Caps know he can be. I know the Caps have won recently. They've gone themselves back into a playoff race. So it's really, really possible that Orlov can continue to help this team get back in the playoff race and keep on trying to make a charge at the playoffs. But if they do end up starting to tumble a little bit and wind up looking like they may not make the playoffs and they are a little bit more like sellers at the deadline, I do think Orlov could be a guy who winds up being moved at the deadline. He's only got 1 year left, and he's a good top 4 defenseman. So I do think there would definitely be some teams out there who would like a guy like Orlov. But definitely getting Orlov back for the playoff chase is really good for the Washington Capitals. And getting him back to possibly be a trade chip at the deadline if they don't look like they're going to make the playoffs is also a good thing. So getting Orlov back is huge. But they did place goalie Darcy Kemper and defenseman Alex Alexiev on injury reserve as well. Now, Kemper had missed a few games recently due to the injury, and being placed on injury reserve, not too surprising. They were able to call up a couple of other guys, especially with the mental injuries that they're dealing with right now. And Kemper being out is not ideal. He's their starting goaltender, and he's played decently this year. So getting Kemper back is going to be huge for the Washington Capitals whenever he gets back. I don't think he should be out too long, probably a week and a half, 2 weeks, somewhere around the Christmas break, maybe closer to the New Year. But definitely Kemper being placed in injury reserve is not a good situation for the Washington Capitals. They don't really have the best third stringer, fourth stringers right now, so they're going to have to really call upon Charlie Lundgren, who has definitely been playing really well lately. But hopefully Kemper can get back in the near future and continue to play really good hockey for the Washington Capitals. As for the other injury, Alexiev, with injuries to guys like Orlov, Carlson, and Ferravari, had stepped in for a few games and show that he can still be a really good third-pair defenseman for the Washington Capitals. But he missed a substantial time at the start of the year due to an injury, and now he's back out due to an injury. He's only day-to-day right now, so it's not the worst of situations. I don't think he should be out too long, but losing another healthy body on the defensive end is not an ideal situation for the Capitals. I think Alexiev hopefully will get back in the next week or two, maybe 3 weeks, closer to the New Year, and get back into game action. And hopefully he can do really good. But bad news for Alexiev to go back on injury reserve. Hopefully Alexiev and Kemper can get back and help this Capitals continue their playoff push. And lastly, here with the Buffalo Sabres, they placed 2 players on injury reserve, defenseman Henry Jokiharju and forward Vinny Hinostroza, as both players were placed on injury reserve and will miss the foreseeable future. Now, for Hinostroza, it's not too big of a issue to be placed on injury reserve. He did miss a few games before he was placed in injury reserve, so he should be able to get back whenever he's healthy. And he's only day-to-day right now with an undisclosed injury. So for Hinostroza, I don't think it's too bad for him that he's going to miss the next week or two. He's a good third-pair forward, so losing him is not too substantial. But whenever he gets back, he should be able to slot back into the bottom 6. So losing Hinostroza not too bad, but he's only going to miss a week or two, so I don't think it's going to be too significant for the Buffalo Sabres. But as for the other injury, Henri Jokiharju was placed on reserve, and he is out week to week with a lower body injury. Now, Jokiharju missed a huge chunk of the season from late October to late November. He missed a substantial portion of the season, along with Samuelsson. Those two were out for a long time earlier in the year, and both came back. Jokiharju's been back for the last week, 2 weeks, somewhere around there, and now he's back to being injured. So week to week, probably won't be back until after Christmas break, maybe even into the new year. So bad news for Jokiharju and the Sabres, but hopefully he can get back. At this moment, he really does round out that Sabres top four with guys like Power, Samuelsson, and Dahlin. So losing Jokiharju is not going to be good, and hopefully Jokiharju and Hinstroza can get back and help this Buffalo Sabres team, as they're not really playing too well right now, and they're starting to fall out of the playoff race. Now over to the trade rumor part of the video, and I'll start with the Arizona Coyotes. It does look like Nick Ritchie could be a very, very interesting player come trade deadline time. Now, Nick Ritchie signed a 2-year deal with the Toronto Maple Leafs last offseason in free agency, and he was coming off a really good year with Boston, so the Leafs were hoping he could be a good bomb six forward for them. But when he came in to the Maple Leafs, there was not really a huge fit for him, and he didn't really do well. So Maple Leafs traded him last year, around January, traded him along with a third-round pick to Arizona for a couple of players. Now, he has actually done really well with the Arizona Coyotes. He's had gotten around 15 points in 25-30 games last year when he was with the Arizona Coyotes. This year, he started out quite well. He's put up 7 goals and 12 points in 23 games, and he looks like a really good bottom six forward. Now, I know that there have been a few teams recently, like the St. Louis Blues and Philadelphia Flyers, who have been looking for a more physical bottom six forward who can score, who have been linked to him in the past few weeks. But definitely think there could be a few other options for the Arizona Coyotes. I think Nick Ritchie is a really good bottom six forward. He only has this year left, so he's going to be a rental at the trade deadline. He has $2.5 million on his cap hit, and that's probably a little bit rich for some teams for a bottom six forward. But I think that if the Arizona were to retain some salary, they could probably make a trade work. I think that Ritchie's not going to bring in a huge return. He's not one of those elite level players who's going to bring in a huge return. But I do think the Arizona Coyotes could get a third-round pick and a decent prospect for him. And I think that there could be a few teams, especially if Arizona were to retain salary, who would pay up that price for him. I think a third-round pick and a decent-level prospect definitely would get it done for Arizona, given the fact they were given a third-round pick to take on his contract. Moving him for some assets, that would be huge. This is what Arizona's been doing over the past year and a half. They've been taking players who have had bad contracts that teams didn't want. They've been putting them in places where they could succeed. They've been playing really well, and then they've been shipping them off for better returns. So getting Ritchie seems like a really good move from Arizona's standpoint, and I think that Ritchie could find his way out of Arizona in the very near future. But I do want to know what you think. Do you think Ritchie will be moved before the trade deadline? And if so, where do you think is the best fit for him? Now over to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, we have recently found out that the Canucks have offered Bo Horvat a contract, probably a 7 to 8 year deal at between $7 and $8 million, probably around the $7.5 million range, and Horvat rejected it. So it does seem at this point in time like Horvat probably doesn't want an extension. I mean, the guy's career high in points is 61. At this moment, he currently has 20 goals, 29 points in 20 games. So he's over a point per game pace, and he's on pace for hitting at least 40, if not 50 goals this year. So definitely looks like Horvat has priced himself out of Vancouver. I don't think Vancouver could go higher than $8 million. And I think on the open market in free agency, there would be definitely a team or two who would be willing to pay Horvat 6 to 8 year deal at around $8.5 to $9 million, I think, to be their second line center. So I definitely think that Horvat's better in free agency now, and I still think they should have signed Horvat and let Miller go. I think signing Miller was the wrong move, and I think they could have traded him and gotten a pretty big package. And now Miller's not playing well, and they're probably going to have to move Horvat. Horvat's their captain, a good young player, and their leader on their team, so it's not really going to be a good to move him, but they probably will have to. Now, I think a Horvat trade could bring them in quite a haul. I think at the very least, in a Horvat deal, they could get a first-round pick, a really high-level prospect, and maybe a player back to make the cap work. But I definitely think that Horvat's most likely going to be on his way out now. With the Canucks now having this offer rejected, they're probably going to try and find a deal. I think this deal could even come before the trade deadline in January or February. So I do think there definitely would be teams in on Horvat. Guys like Colorado and NYI who could use some scoring would definitely be teams who would be interested, but I definitely think it's now a matter of if and not when Horvat is dealt. I think that there's another guy in Brock Boeser who could be dealt. We know that Boeser's agent has recently been given permission to seek a trade elsewhere, and I think Boeser being traded is a very likely possibility. Like I said before, I think a second-round pick and a lower-level prospect or a third-round pick and high-level prospect would be a good return for Boeser. I know his cap hits are really a lot to take right now, so that's why I do think Brock Boeser trade will be hard because of his cap hit, but he's still a good player who I think could put up 30 goals. Like I said, I think Jersey, Pittsburgh, and Calgary would be the three best fits in my opinion, and I still think Boeser is another guy who could be dealt soon. Luke Schenn on the defensive end, he's only signed for the rest of this year at $900,000. He's a top four defenseman who is a really good physical player. So given all of these things, I know Schenn wants to remain with the Vancouver Canucks, and he said so. But given he's a top four defenseman and his cap hit, there would be a lot of teams lining up to get him. And I think they could even get like a third-round pick and a decent level prospect at least for a guy like Schenn. So I think Schenn is another guy on the table. And then guys like Myers and Garland I think are less likely to be moved. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of those two were also moved. So definitely keep an eye on the Vancouver Canucks. I think Garland, Boeser, Horvat, Schenn, Myers, all five guys could possibly be moved at least before the deadline, if not sooner. So definitely keep an eye on the Vancouver Canucks. And lastly here, the Christmas roster freeze is going to happen either Sunday or Monday. I'm not exactly sure. I'm pretty sure it's Monday, but it could be Sunday. And after the roster freeze, there'll be no players being placed on waivers or being traded until the day after Boxing Day. So could we see a trade before the Monday roster freeze? I think it's definitely a possibility. I know a guy like Chychrun, who's been wanting to be out of Arizona, could be moved. I think the asking price is really difficult for a lot of teams, but I think that if Arizona were to make a trade, maybe they do it before the trade freeze. I know Puljujarvi has said that he hasn't played really well this year, and the Edmonton Oilers are willing to try and find him a new spot where he can play. You've also got Boeser and Horvat, who the Canucks seem really intent to try and find a trade with. Could they find a trade before roster freeze? I think it's possible. Now, I don't think we'll for sure see a trade before the roster freeze. I know not many trades happen before the roster freeze. I know one of the more substantial ones was a few years ago when Taylor Hall was dealt by the New Jersey Devils to Arizona Coyotes. But I definitely think that we probably won't see a trade. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a trade or two, and one of them was a little bit more substantial than the rest. So definitely keep an eye on all the trade rumors as we lead up to the roster freeze. And that's all I want to talk about today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I do a blog, which I will leave a link to in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.